hand or rubbing our own shoulder.
You're doing all right there, right?
Right, exactly.
Hang in there, buddy.
Right. Because there's research that has shown that those acts of self-compassion can change behavior. So if we are reflecting that onto ourselves, how much easier it is to reflect that compassion out to someone else.
Right. We can't give what we don't have, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
One of my mentors says that if we talked to other people the way we often talk to ourselves, we'd all be in jail.
Yeah. Yeah. We certainly wouldn't have a whole lot of friends.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So, but there's nothing, and I think one of the steps is just being aware of it. Sometimes I think it's just so second nature to have that negative self-talk, those inner critics, the limiting beliefs, the negative self-judgments that we don't even know they're happening. We may have been doing them for so many years that we don't even know they're there. So just kind of taking a moment to stop and reflect on that and create some awareness of what am I saying to myself now? Am I realizing there is no perfect in this scenario?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and one of the things I've heard too, you were talking about the toolbox. I really love that analogy. And one of the things is that every day can be so different. Right. So just because you've got all the tools on the job for the day that you're at doesn't mean those same tools are going to work the next day, right?
Exactly.
So it's almost like you've got to recreate yourself, put a different toolkit together, and find tools you don't even have. Probably since you run into the store for some new things or looking for those resources as things progress, and then move back and forth. So it's kind of a dance almost, right? Of being prepared.
Absolutely. I mean, I say that exact thing in workshops that we do on kind of effective responses to dementia-related behavior. So that could be things like wandering or aggression. I always say that we're all individuals, and even that person living with a diagnosis, even in those middle and late stages, ultimately their behavior is a form of communication, right? Because they're not able to communicate in traditional ways. It's just a form of communication, and it's trying to figure out how to respond in a way to meet their need. And there's always a reason for the behavior, right? We may not know it, and it may be very hard to figure out, but there's always a trigger for that behavior. And that's what I say to caregivers is, we're going to talk today about some skills. We're going to talk today about some ways to respond. And they may work one day, and they may not work the next. Right. And they may work a lot of the time, and, one day they don't work anymore. And so it's really all about really changing the way that we think about the disease and the effects of the disease, and really helping people kind of come at it from a model more of empowerment rather than just react.
Yeah, I like what you say about the behaviors. There's always something behind it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's true in life in general. With any type of behavior, there's some reason for it. And if we can tap into that, the phrase, you were talking, the phrase, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, came to mind. We have to distinguish between the person and what's really going on versus the behavior.
Right. Exactly.
And that's true with ourselves, on a daily basis, not to mention somebody who does have Alzheimer's, especially in the later stages where that behavior is getting more intense and their inability to communicate what's really going on. So then we got to find other ways to do that, to try to figure it out and to find the real person in the midst of the behavior, right? To still care for and love that real person.
Yeah. And that's, the way that you put it, I like that the way you kind of, compare it to the entire lifespan. And we certainly talk about the experience that someone goes through who is living with Alzheimer's. We really try to kind of normalize that as much as possible with the person living with the disease and the caregiver to really say, hey, there is a behavior that this person is experiencing, but we all respond. We all have triggers. We all respond to things that have a negative effect on us throughout life. Some of us yell. Some of us throw our fists in the air. Some of us don't refuse to talk. Some of us walk out the door. And that really is, the kind of the same experience for someone who is living with Alzheimer's. It's just that they cannot communicate to us or tell us what's wrong, right?
Right.
And they can't really self-control in that moment, right? That's really what they've lost. But I think it's really important for caregivers and those living with a diagnosis and those who are around them to look at the disease through that lens. Because when we separate, or when we talk about, when we kind of take away that normalization, I think that tends to allow that stigma to remain, right? We get scared. It's something that's other. But if we can relate it to ourselves and our own experiences, one, we're much more willing to engage with those who have Alzheimer's and dementia. And two, particularly from a caregiver's perspective, we're more empowered to say, okay, I've done this before in life. I know how to respond to people. It just looks a little different, and I need to, kind of look at the disease in a little bit different light in order to respond to it effectively. So I think when caregivers and care partners feel empowered to respond, they feel that, they do have the capability of learning how to respond effectively. That's kind of 90% of the battle, and then we add some specific tools to help them.
Jeff will be back shortly to wrap up today's message. This is Gabriela, still on the scene today with Talk Network Radio. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Empowered Living with Jeff Byrd. If you've missed any part of today's message, you can hear it again online, as well as the entire archive of Empowered Living at www.talknetworkradio.com or search keyword #EmpoweredLiving. We would like to acknowledge our music partners, Sound Ideas for Corporate to the Max and Kevin MacLeod for Airport Lounge. Any scriptures read during this broadcast are from the New American Standard Version of the Holy Bible. If you would like to learn more about Jeffrey Byrd Coaching, visit www.jeffbyrdcoaching.com. That is JEFFBYRD coaching.com. Do a Facebook search for @CoachingRocks, or drop Jeff a line at jeff@jeffbyrdcoaching.com. Again, JEFFBYRD coaching.com. Let Jeff's Coaching Rocks be the building blocks of your empowered success. Now, let's go back to Jeff for the rest of today's message.
Yeah, so let me ask you for a minute about the connection between self-care and empowerment, because and specifically for those people who are really, a lot of their time is spent providing care, the exhaustion side. Because I know personally, I always know there's a story behind the behavior, but when I'm exhausted, I really don't care what the story is.
Exactly.
You need to deal with your story, because I'm done, and you don't need to be on my last nerve, So my patience level, there's a direct, or there's an inverse correlation between my own rest level and how much care I've had, and my patience level and understanding and resulting compassion with someone else.
Yeah.
So what are some of the things you do to help those caregivers, especially the full-time ones, if they live with something, to actually be able to get enough for themselves that they're breathing and they're in a good space? How does that work?
So I would say, first of all, it's to ask for help.
Okay.
And I recognize that's not always easy for caregivers in a kind of philosophical sense, that asking for help is hard for all of us. And our culture certainly doesn't encourage us to ask for help. And two, practically, it's sometimes really difficult for caregivers to ask for help because there might not be an obvious person there who can help.
Yeah.
So I think, one, taking the step to say, to simply say, I need help. I can't do this all by myself. And, particularly with Alzheimer's disease, it's just taking maybe a step of calling, our helpline and our 24/7 helpline and saying, I need help, but I don't know what help. I don't know how to find it, because caring for someone alone 24/7 is almost an insurmountable job, and so being able, even if it's just a little bit of help for someone to come in or for that loved one to go somewhere to get some time to recharge and to be on, to care for and do the things that bring you joy. 2, I would say that a very practical response in that moment, kind of as you described, this behavior is happening again, I'm at my wit's end. One of the tools that we give people is that sometimes you just have to leave the room.
I have a friend that calls it stepping out of the tornado.
Yeah. You have to, as long as that person is safe and, they're physically in a place where they're safe, aren't going to fall, things like that. It's removing yourself from the room, taking a deep breath, and practicing some of those actions of self-compassion, right?
So as long as the patient is safe and in a secure environment, their expectation is not necessarily my mandate. I can walk away from it sometimes and get what I need as long as they're okay.
Yeah, and I mean, I think being able to judge when you've gotten to that point and you're just not going to be able to respond is in a positive way or in an effective way is by stepping out of that space, you're doing the best thing for yourself, but also for that person that you're trying to help. Because if you are only now going to be able to respond negatively, then it's only going to further escalate.
You're not going to help anybody.
Right.
Yeah.
And like all of us, in life, when we are in a stressful situation with another human being, whether that be a discussion or an argument, we feed off each other's emotions. And it's very, very hard to not do that. And so sometimes removing yourself from the room helps kind of break that cycle of escalation. Another thing that I talk about often is, I kind of call it your pink bubble, my pink bubble. Okay. So I like to imagine if I'm in a space that it's highly charged emotionally, and I'm trying to remain mindful of that emotion and observe it, but not let it permeate me, so that I internalize it and then reflect it back out. I like to imagine a pink bubble, because pink is very soothing.
Right.
But a bubble still allows you to observe.
Right.
It's somewhat soft, but it is a barrier between you and what's going on. And it sounds kind of funny, but actually being able to, if you're in that space, being able to just separate yourself softly from that emotion, so that you can be mindful of what emotion you're feeling and observing, and then change your response to be an opposing emotion, right? So if it's anger, then you're going to project calm, or peace.
Well, I love the pink bubble illustration. I've never heard of that before, although I relate to what you're saying of realizing this energy's going on here, and it doesn't have to get to me.
Right.
I'm going to be here. I'm going to be my calm, composed, insightful, understanding self, hopefully, and see into what's going on, and then have an appropriate, helpful response to it. But I like the bubble illustration. Now, mine's probably not going to be pink. It might be more like aquamarine, or maybe royal blue.
Yeah,
like
there
you can pick your color,
you can
right?
choose your color, whatever soothes you.
yeah, but I like that. And I want to jump back to something you said at the beginning, that when you were talking about stories, because I love stories, and I love to talk about stories.
Yeah.
And I've often thought that before we know someone's story, we tend to see external differences. After we know a story, we're able to see internal similarities. But I'm trying to place myself in the shoes